Year 12, we are going to be covering our final poem in Blake's poem Songs of Innocence and Experience today by focusing on a divine image, not one to be mistaken with the divine image, which is in Songs of Innocence. I'm just going to share my screen. Whilst this is a small looking poem from the offset, it really packs a punch in terms of the themes and the portrayal of humanity that it gets across to you as the reader. I want to start off by focusing on some of the images on the screen in front of us. As we know, for every single one of Blake's poems, there is an accompanying image. So think about what image of humanity this one is creating. We have the fiery forge, we have this sort of anguished looking human, seeming to be full of energy, but also that destructive nature that we've also seen in the tiger as well, linking with perhaps the Industrial Revolution and the kind of fearful capacity that a human being can transmit to both themselves and to others. I've also got 4 different icons on the screen because these for me kind of summarize our entire thinking of the poem. We have a reference to the heart, to the face, to the human form, so the physical body, and the human dress. Now, this poem is one that addresses, once again, humanity after the fall of man into this world of darkness and experience, and how the abstract themes that we have seen of mercy, pity, peace, and love in the divine image and the human abstract have actually borne much more fearful and disastrous human emotions, which become cruelty, jealousy, terror, and secrecy. The first thing that I want us to think about first is what we mean by the divine image. We mean that there are links with a higher force, a higher God, a higher being, a celestial being I've got there, and that this idea that it's believed that man has been created in the image of God. So what Blake is questioning here is, why is the divine God or the divine image not reflecting these dangerous and dark qualities of humanity? Why is it that God seems to be this kind of overly perfect and omniscient being without addressing actually the flaws of it? As we know with Blake's religious views, he didn't agree in the belief of a transcendent God, this idea that God is actually in all of us. We have the capacity to transmit these divine qualities ourselves, but arguably due to the fall of man from this golden age, we can't quite get back to that kind of perfect state yet. We need to kind of admit these qualities that we have within us, address them, and correct them. So therefore, Blake advocates the fact that God should be found within us ourselves as humans, and therefore can be dressed in the human form, which is why we have Blake more supportive, broadly speaking, of the New Testament, and through the role of Jesus being the person to kind of, I guess, be the mediator between this abstract divine figure sitting on the clouds and actually, you know, the miserable, darker, weary world of the human being. So I want us to really begin thinking about, well, how is man and humanity portrayed in this poem, and what sort of uncomfortable learnings do we get from the poem? So thinking back then to the divine image, notice again the article change from a specific divine image of God in mind to now something that is very unspecific, a God of sorts, like who is this God, like where are they? So that's really important to place that difference in the article. We learn from the divine image that the human virtues of mercy, pity, peace, and love we're born out of the human form. And actually, no matter where you live in the world, no matter what your beliefs, in whatever God that you wish to worship, we're all actually very much interlinked, because we all can strive and perform these universal attributes, and therefore we are all as one. So what comparisons can we make then? The comparisons can be the fact that we're still dealing with these kind of human abstract thoughts, this idea that these aren't real tangible things. They are a construct of humanity. Humanity has invented these emotions, but as we've seen in the human abstract, which features in Songs of Experience, that poem is attacking the very construct of these emotions and saying, well, you wouldn't need to have mercy, pity, peace and love if we didn't have human suffering, if we didn't have marginalisation, if we didn't have a world of inequality. So actually these are very human-born problems due to our unjust society, which we need to address. So let's have a look at the poem then. Once again, as we know, very deceiving. It seems simple from the outset, but actually it's a whole lot more complicated. Cruelty has a human heart, and jealousy a human face. Terror, the human form divine, and secrecy, the human dress. The human dress is forged iron, the human form a fiery forge, the human face a furnace sealed, the human heart its hungry gorge. I've already addressed this idea that we have, rather than the human virtues, we have the direct opposite here. Cruelty, jealousy, terror, and secrecy, and actually how humanity has created these very abstract thoughts as well. And it kind of portrays a very dark and negative view of humanity. But notice, as I've said before, the repetition of these ideas of the human heart, the face, the form, and the dress. We have the poem which opens with the heart and closes with the heart. So it's this idea that actually the heart is the source of the suffering and the misery. So it starts as a kind of emotional, spiritual, created thing that becomes physical in the movements and actions which are carried out by human beings. But we have here the way that Blake is personifying these emotional quality traits: cruelty, jealousy, terror, and secrecy. And you're also going to see the mirroring on each side, where we have heart, face, the body, and the dress, body, face, heart. So it looks cyclical, even in the structure there, to kind of show how we're kind of bound by these dark jealousies and desires and can't escape it. And it always goes back to the root of the heart, as I've just said. But what Blake is actually addressing here is the idea that these things are, rather than being sort of forged and created in a positive way. You know, we've seen the way that Blake favours the imagination of the child in Songs of Innocence. Here he's kind of overseeing those kind of creative tendencies. You know, when you think about a forge is a place where you are making and shaping metal and other substances through the heat of a furnace. So that is a creative process in itself, but actually it's here seen to be something very destructive, and this kind of this vigor, this energy, which is a nurturing for all negative traits in humanity. From the offset then, we have cruelty with this human heart, this idea that the human heart is something that's consuming things. It's taking, it's greedy, and therefore the secrecy, as we know, has been a repeated idea in Blake's poems, because of the fact that religion is seen to be this overriding mystery cast into shade, when actually there are so many questions that we don't know the answer to. And when Moments like A Little Boy Lost began to question those moments, saw the result in the fiery furnace. So it's almost like here that Blake is seeing that secrecy as blasphemy, the worst form of blasphemy, actually, by concealing and hiding things. Surely we should be encouraged to question our beginnings and have that human curiosity in order to keep innovating, to keep challenging, and ultimately to challenge the status quo as well. The human dress is forged with iron. So we have here the forged iron, which can only be synonymous with London and those mind-forged manacles, which always comes to light. And this idea that, the human form has been chained down. It's not soft, it's not tender and vulnerable, but actually it's something that is being dragged down. The human form as a fiery forge, as I've said, a forge is, a place where you're moulding and shaping things. So therefore, how the maker, so the divine here, God, the maker, the creator, is actually fashioning human beings, if it is in its own image, then that's something that's quite disturbing that we're learning about this sort of celestial being, isn't it? Notice we've got this repetition already of the F's and the kind of the H as well. So we're kind of, everything about this poem is interlinked. Each of these lines have a relationship that crosses over with one another. We also have the sibilance there of the in the line, and secrecy, the human dress, to kind of reveal that kind of whispering dynamic of the concealment created by religion. The human face, a furnace sealed. So we've got this imagery linked with kind of the energy, violence, a metallic energy, which we can make parallels with the Industrial Revolution through that. An interesting use of the word sealed as well, as though it's enclosed, it's trapped, and therefore humanity, if it doesn't sort of realise its miseries and ongoings at the moment, then how are we expected to improve? The human heart, it's hungry gorge, so it's presented as a consuming mouth. It wants more, it's going back to greed, like I mentioned right from the start. But through this repetition, which seems drumming in its very rhythm of the poem, it's kind of emphasising that very fierce and emphatic tone by the speaker as this kind of ultimate addressal to the human being. So we've already said here how the body, rather than seeing it as a child in Songs of Innocence, being innocent, naive, beautiful, yet tender, we have the human, which is linked to an image of the beast that we see within the tiger, and how it's associated with being fierce, through being angry, aggressive, full of powerful energy, dynamite, which is being used for all the wrong reasons. So in terms of the linguistic features of this poem, some of the things I've already referenced so far, we have this violent and metallic imagery being linked with the Industrial Revolution and this sort of negative creative potential of human beings. The H and F alliteration and that we see in there is kind of that interlinking of the lines and the message that is being translated. We also have imagery associated with consumption, and therefore excessive human greed, and I guess exploiting beyond necessary means. We have caesura used in the poem, and this, in case you've forgotten, is when a line is sort of broken in parts, and that's by the punctuation that's been used. So we see as we come to that final stanza, the use of the semicolon, which features in 3 of the 4 lines. It's very disruptive, it feels very jarring and disjointed, just like the sort of kind of the message here that Blake's trying to get across. It's not a fluid translation that's being transmitted from the artist and the poet here to the human, because there is that kind of loss of meaning along the way. Otherwise, humans wouldn't be devouring these four abstract thoughts. We have the assonance. So assonance is when there's a repeated sound. So we have the repeated OR, the OR, so forged, gorged, formed. So all of these three words are being linked together. Forging is to be making, forming and forging. So rather than making, it's actually being associated with something associated with consumption here. As I've already spoken about, the symmetrical structure, where we start from the heart and we end with the heart, as though this is at the source of all things, and the sibilance with the repeated S sound associated with secrecy. Cruelty has a human heart. One thing to note about this poem is it was an add-on written in 1804. So Songs of Innocence and Experience had already been written, published, and this was added on a good few years later, which shows that, Blake is still in the same mindset. Society has not changed to the extent of perhaps his wishes or his hopes, and therefore this is him kind of making that assertive and emphatic message once again through the simplicity of just two stanzas. So cruelty has a human heart. It's the source of everything, isn't it? Both through the physical and obviously the symbolic connotations of it being that emotional source as well. It's worth noting that in terms of the metre of this poem, it's written in iambic tetrameter, so it has 8 syllables per each line, but there is particular stress on the words cruelty and terror, which jump out at the worst kind of states of that the human abstract there. And you might want to be thinking about, well, why is Blake doing that? In order to kind of tie up all of the poems through just 2 stanzas, comes back to this addressal of the 2 contrary states of the human soul. Innocence and experience. Here we have the coexisting states. As I've always mentioned to you, Blake is not advocating one state as more preferable than the other, but actually he's saying that the 2 are coexisting due to the fall of man. And actually, both are necessary in order for us to navigate up our path to a better form of humanity and a displaying of that. So we have this idea that, we live in a world of contraries, a world of contrasts. Yes, we have the potential for the human form to be one that's nurturing, that's tender, that's compassionate and caring, full of love and life. Yet also we have the darkness, the aggression, the creative and dangerous potential that we've seen through the tiger and the lamb being a really good sort of parallel to make there. The adult and the child and the parent, the innocence and the experience, always coming back to kind of grouping all of these ideas in 2 very binary ways. We also have the spiritual and the physical ideas, and how by seeing something physical is easier to understand, isn't it? If you think about Jesus coming through the human form and how he allegedly was able to kind of deliver the message from God in a way that was better understood, and then how that is set up in conflict to the spiritual form of the divine God, the one that, the white father who sits on the clouds with his greying beard and kind of spouting the rules of the 10 Commandments. We also have vision, I think, in terms of vision being something that's very clear and conveys an obvious message, but yet how vision can also become blurred. And I think that is the stage in both innocence and experience, this kind of unconscious blurring of vision, or a conscious one, in order to ignore the darkness of the world in which we know it. Then coming out from that, we have how very personal stories, anecdotes, characters become political and become something that is attacking of the human institutions in society, be it the church, be it the government, be it the hegemonic forces, those ruling class forces, and how they are attacked through those personal stories. So lots of questions that you should be left with. And for me, I think after my reading and interpretations of these poems, it kind of did leave me thinking that, is everything in our life always set up in contrast? You can't, can you ever be happy, truly happy, if you've never been through a form of suffering? Can you, and this kind of, it comes down to the idea that, you always want what you can't have. If you're hot, you prefer to be cool, and vice versa. And therefore, is our world of experience always set up in contrast to the other state? So that was just my little thinking on that. But so what influence do you think that Blake has had over you in terms of, now we've come to the end of these poems, do you agree with the things that he's been saying? Do you think that this is the right sort of portrayal for the society that Blake was dealing with? And likewise, can we see these messages being transmitted through society today? Which kind of links to that second point. So to what extent do you think that these poems advocate radical reform? Is it just kind of Blake's personal musings on society and him reflecting on the inequality, or is he actually stabbing at the very heart of the institutions and the very infrastructure and the core of society? And if you believe that, well, then how is he doing that? How is he attacking the authority? Is he attacking it through an overt way, which he doesn't shy away from? Or do you think that it's actually something that's more subtle? What other critical lenses could you view Blake through? So he lends himself to eco-criticism, he lends himself to Marxism. We could also read feminism in there, the sorts of narrative theory. And actually, maybe it's worth trying to look through the poems through a different lens to see what alternative interpretations you can come up with. Perhaps put post-colonial glasses on to read actually how the status quo is subjugating a group of people in society. And finally, what perspective ultimately do you think that Blake portrays of humanity, and do you agree with it? Do you think we can be as black and white as to say, yes, human beings, showcase these very humble, caring means, yet they also advertise these destructive elements? Do we all have that within us? Or is it a lot more three-dimensional than that? So lots and lots of questions, and hopefully at this point you will be addressing those parallels and contrasts between each of the poems. But ultimately, I hope it has brought new light to you for a lot of things. I hadn't studied Blake before my teaching of it, and actually, I just think it poses lots of questions, and definitely lots of these poems will stay with you for a very long time. We'll be moving on to our looking of Tony Harrison's poem soon, which is quite an obvious link with political protest, you may agree, and as well as finishing our NEA. So the end's almost in sight now, which feels a bit strange, but I wish you all a very good summer, and thank you for your enthusiasm and commitment to getting through these poems as well.